From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has lost his latest appeal to have his UK arrest warrant overturned. That means Assange will face detention if he leaves the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he's been holed up for more than 5 years. The judge said Assange should have the courage to face the consequences of his choices. Assange skipped bail in 2012 to avoid being extradited to Sweden over allegations of sexual assault and rape. Sweden has since dropped the investigation, prompting Assange's appeal for the UK warrant to be quashed. Assange's lawyers argued that the punishment does not match the crime. Our correspondent in London, Pablo Navarrete, has the latest.
In the past hour, a British court has announced that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has lost his latest bid to have his UK arrest warrant dropped. Mr. Assange's lawyers argued that the warrant issued in 2012 was no longer valid because an investigation into sex-related allegations had been dropped by the Swedish authorities. But in a ruling in Westminster Magistrates Court, Senior District Judge Emma Arbuthnot said it was in the public interest to pursue Mr. Assange for failing to answer bail at a police station as he fought extradition to Sweden. The founder of the whistleblower site WikiLeaks, Mr. Assange, argued he flouted the conditions out of his bail out of fear for being handed over to the US government to face an unfair trial for disclosing US government secrets, which he considers a public service. As it stands, Mr. Assange, who's been in the Ecuadorian embassy since 2012 in what the US considers to be an unreasonably arbitrary detention by the British authorities, would face arrest were he to step out of the embassy.
We thank Pablo Navarrete for that report. As you just heard, Assange is concerned that if he is arrested, he may be extradited to the US on espionage charges. Here's why.
Clear. All right, firing. Line here. Let the state line out. Let me know when you have it. Or shoot. Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260s.
Come on, fire.
This video is called Collateral Murder.
Keep shoot.
It's one of the thousands of US classified documents released by WikiLeaks in 2010, showing the death of civilians at the hands of US forces.
Clear.
I believe that if those killings were lawful under the rules of engagement, then the rules of engagement are wrong. Deeply wrong.
The US condemned the move, calling WikiLeaks a non-state hostile intelligence service.
Assange and his ilk make common cause with dictators today. Yes, they try unsuccessfully to cloak themselves and their actions in the language of liberty and privacy, but in reality, they champion nothing but their own celebrity. Their currency is clickbait, their moral compass non-existent.
Despite the 8-year-long verbal campaign against Assange, the US has not launched a public criminal case against him. But that doesn't mean it won't. Just last year, US Attorney General Jeff Sessions said arresting Assange is a priority.
He needs an assurance that he will not be extradited to the United States to face prosecution. And the use of the United States, or the attempted use to abuse espionage laws, to silence public interest publishing and revealing true information in the public interest, is a grave threat to free speech that all of us and every state should be resisting.
The problem is that the UK says it cannot grant Assange that assurance. And that's why Assange has been holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy for more than 5 years, sparking humanitarian protests.
The working group maintains the arbitrary detention of Mr. Assange should be brought to an end. And his physical integrity and his freedom of movement should be respected.
Assange and his supporters applauded the ruling, but it has done little to set him free.
Today is an important victory for me and for the UN human rights system. But it by no means erases 7 years of detention without charge.
Ecuador has been a steady supporter of Assange, offering asylum and then citizenship in December.
He had been a person under international protection for about 5.5 years under the jurisdiction of the Ecuadorian state and its embassy in London. The naturalization was granted on December 12, 2017.
Unfortunately for Assange, the British authorities refused to accept that Ecuadorian nationality gives him any protection.
To Colombia now, where the Attorney General's office has issued an arrest warrant for 21 members of the National Liberation Army, or ELN. This includes Pablo Beltran, the chief negotiator of the armed group in their peace talks with the government. According to a statement issued by the judicial authority, the ELN members are accused of forced displacement and rebellion. 4 other commanders are subject to arrest and 9 members have already been detained. Peace talks were suspended in January after rebels attacked 3 police stations.
We're investigating criminal operations against civilians with 27 new investigations in 8 departments of the country. We're investigating the violent actions against the population, road infrastructure and public forces that took place over the last 3 days. 9 people were arrested in connection to violent acts so far.
Our correspondent Jose Manuel Jimenez has more.
Buenos días, compañeros. Efectivamente, el paro armado decretado por la guerrilla del ELN.
The armed strike decreed by the ELN since February 10th has come to an end, with no deaths. The Attorney General's office has issued an arrest warrant for leaders of the ELN, among them Nicolás Rodríguez Bautista, Antonio Garcia, and Pablo Beltrán, whose arrest warrant is suspended since he is the chief negotiator of the ELN in Quito. Arrest warrants have been also issued for Gustavo Aníbal Giraldo, better known as Pablito, and the head of the Western War Front, Ángel Padilla Romero. Meanwhile, the government continues to discuss with its negotiator, Gustavo Bell, over the option they have to reactivate the dialogue between the ELN and the national government. Various political parties have written a letter to the ELN urging them to agree a bilateral ceasefire as fast as possible and therefore reactivate the negotiations. What we have to highlight here are the victims, the campesinos, indigenous, the Afro-descendant populations that have suffered from the military actions by all armed groups, especially since the escalation by the government forces in the last couple of weeks, which makes it harder for the inhabitants of the regions like Catatumbo, Chocó, and Buenaventura. Society has called for a 5th round of negotiations and that peace may triumph.
Thanks, Jose, for that report. And now we go to Richard McCall, a peace conflict specialist and journalist based in Bogota. Hello, Richard. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, so arrest warrants were issued against ELN members. What can people expect now from the peace dialogue between the ELN and the government?
Well, it's going to be very hard for the government to come to any agreement to reach the table again for this 5th round of talks. The reality is that President Santos has incredibly low approval ratings, and he won't be wanting to be seen as a weak president and to go back and sort of meet the guerrillas on their own terms in Quito. So I feel that basically what's happening is that the government is making these statements and these arrest warrants. Of course, the ELN have been accused of killing 3 or 4 demobilized FARC members in the south of the country and recruiting around 45 minors, underage children, let's say, for their rank and file. This feels like the government is trying to take back some of the initiative to push back the ELN on a political platform rather than a military one.
And switching gears just a bit, I mean, you did mention the FARC. So can you talk about the cancellation of their election campaign? What might happen next with them?
Well, the FARC have a minimum of 5 seats granted to them in the Congress and 5 in the Senate as well. This was granted through the agreement, the peace agreement that came to an end in 2016. they don't need to campaign for these seats. I think they'll just move on very quietly, perhaps not publicizing their campaigns, because there's a lot of people aren't willing to forgive in a lot of parts of Colombia at the moment. They see the FARC as being, one of the main causes of the huge extension and long-running conflict. So it's best that maybe they just focus on their politics and in areas which have had them as a de facto state for so long, rather than other areas of the country.
Okay, thank you so much. We've been speaking to Richard McCall. He's a journalist and peace specialist based in Colombia. Opponents of Venezuela's Bolivarian government are stepping up international pressure. The Lima Group of Latin American countries, including Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, are discussing the impact of Venezuela's decision to call a presidential election in April. A statement issued by Peru's foreign ministry said the group will meet in Peru later on Tuesday to evaluate measures to be taken over Venezuela's political situation. Last week, the United States condemned Venezuela's election and said there are no guarantees to ensure a fair process. And our correspondent in Lima, Jaime Herrera, has more details.
Several Latin American countries, part of the Lima Group, are having a meeting today to discuss Venezuela's decision to hold a presidential election on April 22nd. However, it is not a coincidence that the Lima Group gathered together a few days after the visit of U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and OAS General Secretary Luis Almagro to several countries of the region. During his visit to Mexico, Rex Tillerson asked the Venezuelan government to stop the government of President Nicolás Maduro from having national elections. The U.S. President Donald Trump also made comments about having a military intervention in Venezuela. Meanwhile, social movements in Venezuela have rejected the Lima Group meeting. They said international groups should focus on other countries where democracy has been attacked, such as Brazil and Honduras, and to have a debate about human rights violations in the United States. Here in Peru, a few social groups are demanding the Lima Group discuss the political situation in this country and talk about the government's corruption cases. We are expecting an official announcement at the end of the meeting.
We thank Jaime Herrera for that report. The former president of Guatemala, Alvaro Colom, has been arrested along with 9 members from his government. They are accused of involvement in a corrupt scheme to buy public transport vehicles. Colom was president of Guatemala from 2008 to 2012. The investigation has involved the International Commission Against Impunity, which played a central role in the arrest of Colom's successor, Otto Perez Molina. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting on. Welcome back. We go to Mexico, where 8 bodies were found in a mass grave in the state of Nayarit, specifically in an area known as Cerro Los Coyotes. The graves were discovered near an area where 2 other pits with 33 bodies were found in January. The bodies have not been identified. Investigators believe they have been buried for nearly 6 months. And the pre-campaign period in Mexico has concluded, but the first Indigenous woman to participate in this electoral contest is continuing to reach out to the poor.
This meeting, attended by students of the National Pedagogical University, is not academic. However, for these young people, the visit of María de Jesús Patricio, known as Marichuy, the first independent candidate for the Indigenous Council of Government, is an honor.
Our thesis and academic research isn't always very useful, so it's important that as students we are here with Marichuy, listening to the realities of our peoples. The testimonies of all these women, it's really great.
The Student Council of the university, which trains Mexico's future teachers, had prepared days in advance to receive the message from Marichuy.
We are forgotten, the people. The governments only use us for the pre-campaign period in campaigns, and they only want our votes. After this is over, they no longer remember us.
The independent Indigenous pre-candidate plans to represent more than just the causes of Mexico's original people with her movement.
We raise the flag of the demands of women and indigenous peoples. The working class has to get ahead. It has to go into the streets and fight in different ways.
The pre-campaign period ended, but Marichuy brings the message of the poorest communities to Mexico City's youth.
There is only one step to overthrowing this capitalist system, to overthrowing those who have appropriated everything, who have money and power, and it is organizing this. We don't see any other way out. We have to trust in one another.
According to the latest numbers, María de Jesús has more than 500,000 signatures to appear on the ballot on July 1st and has until February 19th to collect the 800,000 required. Even if the voice of the Indigenous Council of Government falls short, important achievements have been made. The work to visibilize indigenous people.
García, Telesur, Ciudad de México.
Femicide rates in Chile are rising, and feminist organizations are gearing up to make their voices heard during the International Women's Day March.
For Chilean Network Against Violence Against Women, the situation is alarming. This year, 8 femicides have occurred, together with brutal cases of abuse to little girls.
There has not been proper information about violence against women. We just received gynecological reports of an 11-year-old girl. We have also received details of sexual aggression on a 2-year-old girl. That is not necessary.
This month, the National Day Against Violence in Relationships is celebrated after a year since Antonia Garros committed suicide. The young woman jumped from a building after a quarrel with her boyfriend. This is why activists are pushing for the establishment of a crime called Instigation to Female Suicide by promoting initiatives as a phone app for Android to help women in violent situations. Nonetheless, the legislation on the issue is far from being defined.
That law is inactive. It's been 22 years since Chile promised to make it. This government at least presented a project, but that's really it.
Latin America and the Caribbean are the regions with the higher rates of violence against women. It is there where feminist organizations as Ni Una Menos have achieved to go beyond borders and gather people to fight against the violence.
We focus on precarious labor conditions and every kind of structural violence towards women, the right to practice free and safe abortion, and sexual and reproductive rights for women. But the panorama hasn't changed much in 5 years.
Feminists in Chile are preparing to celebrate Women's Day with a new national march.
They should recognize the actual situation. Right now it's impossible for us to tell women to stop working for 1 or 2 hours just to take part in the march without unions backing them up.
With or without strikes, feminist movements will continue to fight to eradicate the violence against women in the continent and worldwide.
2 mud volcanoes in South Trinidad erupted on Tuesday morning. Homes were evacuated in Devil's Woodyard in New Grant, where the volcanoes are located. The first happened around 4 on Tuesday morning, and the second, which you're seeing in this video, happened around 9 Trinidad time. Mud volcanoes happen because of the movement of the earth, but they do not produce lava and are not driven by volcanic activity. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting on.
Maternal love is the love that's going to change the future of mankind. So we'd like you to
we like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind, because it's more inclusive.
There we go, exactly. Yes, thank you.
We can all learn from each other.
Welcome back. The U.S. President Donald Trump is proposing to increase military spending from $74 billion to $716 billion. This would be the biggest military budget the United States has seen since 2011. It comes as part of Trump's new spending plans, which also include more money for homeland security and anti-immigration measures, while food and health programs for the poor are cut. We hope to go live to Washington and our correspondent Jorge Hestuso. Hello, Mr. Hestuso, how are you? Okay. Jorge, we seem to be having... Jorge Hestuso, are you hearing me? Okay, we haven't sorted out our technical issues in a bit, so we're going to move on to another story, and we'll try and go back to that interview. South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress, has formally asked President Jacob Zuma to resign as head of state. Zuma, who is still in power, has told officials that he will resign in the next 2 to 3 months. Zuma's presidency has been plagued by allegations of corruption. And the British charity Oxfam is fighting to save its government funding following revelations about sexual misconduct by staff working in Haiti after 2010's devastating earthquake. With $44 million of government funding to Oxfam hanging in the balance, senior managers were summoned to a meeting with Britain's aid minister, Penny Mordaunt. According to Mordaunt, she will move, quote, hastily on this decision. And in Haiti, the country's president, Jovenel Moïse, has responded to the Oxfam scandal, tweeting that what happened with Oxfam in Haiti is extremely serious and a violation of human dignity. Now let's have a look at some other stories from around the world.
A Nigerian court has sentenced a Boko Haram member for 15 years for kidnapping more than 200 Chibok girls in 2014. Haruna Yahaya is the first member of the group to be sentenced for involvement in the mass abduction, which has sparked a worldwide campaign for the girls' release. The military court in the Kanji region is hearing cases of nearly 1,000 Boko Haram suspects. Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas has met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow to discuss the issue of Jerusalem and the Middle East. Abbas has told Putin he could no longer accept the role of the United States as a mediator in talks with Israel because of Washington's behavior towards Jerusalem.
If there is some sort of an international conference, We require that it should work out a mechanism where the United States will not be a single mediator, but a part of a mediating group.
North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un has appreciated the warm reception of the delegation to the South for the Winter Olympics. Kim also said that it is important to boost the warm climate of reconciliation and dialogue after meeting with the high-level delegation that returned to the North after their 3-day visit in the South for the Winter Olympics. A battle of oranges is taking place in the Italian city of Ivrea. Hundreds of people have joined the annual carnival, thrashing each other with oranges. During the 3-day carnival, participants are divided into 2 groups, commoners who are on foot and guards of the medieval lords who are transported around by carriage.
Now we're going to go back to our earlier story about President Trump wanting to increase military spending, and we're going to go live to Washington and our correspondent, Jorge Gestoso. Jorge, how significant is this increase in military spending? Okay, so we're still having technical issues with that story. So we have come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at talisutv.net/English.